Good, it's working. That's too bright. Yeah, no, that was way too bright. We'll leave it there in case it turns out to be necessary, but I don't think it will be. Okay, let me find the place what we're up to. Hello. Person who's just joined, hello. Hello, 2 people who've just joined. Thank you for subscribing to my channel, which is probably the only way you would know that this had started. The case of Charles Dexter Ward, not the Charles. Hey, Nick, how's it going? Basically, Charles Dexter Ward, Dexo, he is a pale Lovecraftian scholarly boy, you know. He's the Lovecraft protagonist. And he's researching the history of Old Providence and finds out that this guy, Joseph Kerwin, who was a... Hey, what's up? Hey, John and Danny. Joseph Kerwin, who was a famous, like, sorcerer, kind of. He turns out to be Charles Ward's ancestor. Oh man, I cannot recap all of this. It's so complicated at this point. But oh, lawn billiards. Nice. Is that like petanque? Petanque sounds like a made-up word. It's not though. Oh, that's right. We got to the end of part 3. We were about to begin part 4. So Charles Ward has basically... Oh, cool. Oh, nice. Oh, well. Charles Ward's basically found out that Joseph Kerwin was his ancestor. He was this horrible sorcerer guy. And now Charles has gone nuts. He's not really researching history anymore. He's researching the occult. And very recently, his parents overheard a bunch of chanting and rituals, you know, the kind of thing that you don't really want to hear coming from your sons. Satanic library. And then a bunch of screaming. And now he says he's fine. He's totally fine. And the portrait of Joseph Kerwin that Charles found, that looks exactly like him, except with a little pockmark under the eye. The portrait has crumbled. So I think that's, you know, broad strokes. There's a lot more going on, but broad strokes, that's pretty much what happened. Now, I'm just trying to get the phone right. So I have put... just wasting some time here in case some people show up, but I've had to put my pillow up on a high shelf this morning. I'm going to just keep it on a shelf when I'm not actively sleeping on it, because Nivy likes to sleep on it, and I'm allergic to her. So I wake up, like my eyes are all irritated, and... Oh, I haven't taken my antihistamine. As usual. Bloody typical. Also, my sunglasses broke, so I've been having to borrow Megan Targaryen's sunglasses, which I feel really belong to her. I don't feel they're really mine. I know. I think it's the fact that she might be part Maine Coon, so she sheds so much fur. I'm not sure. Oh, I'm going to be bummed if these break. Which they probably will be. Antihistamine. Come on, girl. Sort yourself out. Yeah, that'll do. So other than that, she's a good girl. She's still asleep on my bed. She's been sleeping there for about 24 hours, I think. I've been checking on her. She's alive, but she's probably just working through some things. So we're just going to wait like a little bit longer, just in case there are people who really want to join us but haven't yet for whatever reason. I'm going to quickly fishtail plait a little bit of my hair, and you guys can tell me how your week has been, what you think about the election results. I'm really, really happy that that National's all fucked up and everything. But Labour and the Greens having such a strong mandate, it kind of feels like no one's going to hold them to account if they break their promises, you know? So, yeah, well, internationally, people seem to think it's a great thing. Because they're kind of judging us by our COVID response and not by whatever mad stuff Judith Collins is trying to convince people is the truth. So, they all seem pretty happy for us, I think. Personally, I'm waiting until the cannabis referendum results are announced before I get too happy. But it was so funny last night. Okay, there were international reactions last night because I don't know if you saw this, but the National Party and Judith Collins had to lock their Twitter accounts. Just beautiful. And a bunch of people noticed and laughed. It was great. I sent a follow request to the National Party just because I wanted to see and, like sass them and stuff. But they've unlocked it this morning, so I don't have to follow. Hooray. Also, apparently David Seymour was kind of drunk on TV last night. I don't know. I'll have to look up the clip for that. I didn't actually watch it. So that's great. All of that's just... Judith Collins is the leader for now. Is that what he said? Oh my god, that is straight out of the thick of it. Oh, Armando Iannucci should be paid royalties for 2020. He really should. It was when Nicola Murray, she had to say that that the Prime Minister was the man for the moment. Or he was the man of the moment. Yeah. They were like, are you doing a leadership bid? Do you think a woman should be Prime Minister? And she was supposed to say that the Prime Minister we have now is the right man. He is the man of the moment. And she fucked up on TV and she said, he is the man for the moment. But I feel like Jerry Brownlee did not fuck up. I feel like he said exactly what he meant to say. That's so great. Oh, man. Being a deputy in National doesn't mean you back each other up. It means you're waiting to stab. So good. Also, one of the few National MPs to actually get their seat was that little 5-year-old boy. Adorable. I don't know how old he is, but he looks 5. Ah, politics. Anyway, right. Simeon Brown, yeah. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Maybe it's pronounced Simon. I don't know. But he's just a little boy. He looks like he's in picture day. Oh, yeah, we weren't supposed to tweet political things at all. I think, what was I tweeting yesterday? I was doing Always Sunny fanfic about Frank raising the dead from their essential salts, like in Charles Dexter Ward. So I wasn't really doing anything political. He's 29? Oh my god. Has he got like permanent Benjamin Button syndrome where he just always looks like a 5-year-old child on picture day? He's so gormless. He's a little baby with no chin. Oh, that's cute. I mean, he's probably like a super repellent human being, but it's kind of adorable. Oh, National locking their Twitter, yeah. Yeah, I thought they hated lockdowns. All of a sudden, lockdown is good when you're being dunked on completely internationally. Anyway, we're about 10 minutes in. There are 4 people here, so that's as usual. So, in the last chapter, peeling clear of the wood, the portrait of Joseph Kerwin had resigned forever its staring surveillance of the youth it so strangely resembled, and now lay scattered on the floor as a thin coating of fine bluish-grey dust. That was the end of part 3. So, I've got my 1 day at cola for the day. I'm limiting myself to 1 a day. Just trying to cut down. Woo! Oh. Part 4. A mutation and a madness. Part 4, Chapter 1. In the week following that memorable Good Friday, you are an international treasure. Your face is an international treasure, Danny. In the week following that memorable Good Friday, Charles Ward was seen more often than usual and was continually carrying books between his library and the attic laboratory. His actions were quiet and rational, but he had a furtive, hunted look which his mother did not like, and developed an incredibly ravenous appetite, as gauged by his demands upon the cook. Furtive, paranoid, huge appetite. He's smoking marijuana. Dr. Willett had been told of these Friday noises and happenings, and on the following Tuesday had a long conversation with the youth in the library, where the picture stared no more. The interview was, as always, inconclusive, but Willett is still ready to swear that the youth was sane in himself at the time. He held out promises of an early revelation, and spoke of the need of securing a laboratory elsewhere. At the loss of the portrait, he grieved singularly little, considering his first enthusiasm over it, but seemed to find something of positive humour in its sudden crumbling. He's pregnant, yeah, he's pregnant. And he's become ironic, he's become obsessed with internet irony. Haha, the picture crumbled. Actually, that's good to me. It's funny. About the second week, Charles began to be absent from the house for long periods. And one day, when good old African-American Hannah came to help with the spring cleaning, she mentioned his frequent visits to the old house in Olney Court, Joseph Kerwin's old house, where he would come with a large valise, suitcase anyway, and perform curious delvings in the cellar. He was always very liberal to her and to old Asa, but seemed more worried than he used to be. These are the people who live in Joseph Kerwin's old house now. Which grieved her very much, since she had watched him grow up from birth. Another report of his doings came from Pawtuxet, where some friends of the family saw him at a distance a surprising number of times. He seemed to haunt the resort and canoe house of Rhodes on the Pawtuxet, and subsequent inquiries by Dr. Willett at that place brought out the fact that his purpose was always to secure access to the rather hedged-in riverbank, along which he would walk toward the north, usually not reappearing for a very long while. Listeners may remember that Joseph Curwen's cursed Pawtuxet farm, where he did a lot of necromancy and stuff, supposedly had an entrance in the bank to a bunch of underground tunnels. Possibly. I feel like I shouldn't be reminding you guys of this and just let you put it together later on, but fuck it, who's got time to keep up with all this stuff, you know? Late in May came a momentary revival of ritualistic sounds in the attic laboratory, which brought a stern reproof from Mr. Ward and a somewhat distracted promise of amendment from Charles. It occurred one morning and seemed to form a resumption of the imaginary conversation noted on that turbulent Good Friday, the day of all the screaming. The youth was arguing or remonstrating hotly with himself, for there suddenly burst forth a perfectly distinguishable series of clashing shouts in differentiated tones, like alternate demands and denials, which caused Mrs. Ward to run upstairs and listen at the door. She could hear no more than a fragment whose only plain words were, "Must have it read for 3 months." And upon her knocking, all sounds ceased at once. When Charles was later questioned by his father, he said that there were certain conflicts of spheres of consciousness which only great skill could avoid, but that he would try to transfer to other realms. Charles Ward's parents are incredible. They're like, well, we don't mind you doing strange rituals and arguing with yourself and altered psychic states, but we'd just rather you do it in the house. Except, you know, his dad would rather he doesn't do it in the house. Oh, very nice. Sad to see you go, Nick, but happy you were here. And have a good time. See you next time. About the middle of June, a queer nocturnal incident occurred. In the early evening, there had been some noise and thumping in the laboratory upstairs, and Mr. Ward was on the point of investigating when it suddenly quieted down. That midnight, after the family had retired, the butler was night-locking the front door. Yeah, they're like, oh, Charles said he was just arguing with himself. Why would he lie about that? Also, he's eating for 2 now. That's odd, but within the realms of fine. Yeah, he's a don't bring it home dad, and Mrs. Ward is a would rather you do it in the house mom. Also, she's the side that he gets Joseph Curwen's DNA from, so. That midnight, after the family had retired, the butler was night locking the front door when, according to his statement, Charles appeared somewhat blunderingly and uncertainly at the foot of the stairs with a large suitcase and made signs that he wished egress. Dirty bugger. The youth spoke no word, but the worthy Yorkshireman caught one sight of his fevered eyes and trembled causelessly. He opened the door and young Ward went out, but in the morning he presented his resignation to Mrs. Ward. There was, he said, something unholy in the glance Charles had fixed on him. It was no way for a young gentleman to look at an honest person, and he could not possibly stay another night. Mrs. Ward allowed the man to depart, but she did not value his statement highly. To fancy Charles in a savage state that night was quite ridiculous, for as long as she had remained awake, she had heard faint sounds from the laboratory above, sounds as if of sobbing and pacing, and of a sighing which told only of despair's profoundest depths. Mrs. Ward had grown used to listening for sounds in the night, for the mystery of her son was fast driving all else from her mind. She's concerned that she can hear a person being very deeply depressed upstairs, but not so concerned as to bring the doctor in. Well, she did bring the doctor in, actually. And he's just like, well, he's not mental yet. He's not mad. I can't date his madness from this time. The next evening, much as on another evening nearly 3 months before, Charles Ward seized the newspaper very early and accidentally lost the main section. The matter was not recalled till later, when Dr. Willett began checking up loose ends and searching out missing links here and there. In the journal office, he found the section which Charles had lost and marked 2 items as of possible significance. They were as follows. Yeah, she's just unconcerned about the quiet sobbing, the soul in the depths of despair. I mean, just keeping an eye on it, kind of. They were as follows. More cemetery delving. It was this morning discovered by Robert Hart, night watchman at the North Burial Ground, that ghouls were again at work in the ancient portion of the cemetery. The grave of Ezra Whedon, who was born in 1740 and died in 1824, according to his uprooted and savagely splintered slate headstone, was found excavated and rifled, the work being evidently done with a spade stolen from an adjacent tool shed. Whatever the contents may have been after more than a century of burial, all was gone except a few slivers of decayed wood. There were no wheel tracks, but the police have measured a single set of footprints, which they found in the vicinity, and which indicate the boots of a man of refinement. Yeah, come back when you're fully crazy is the New Zealand health system. Yeah. Yeah, if you're sane enough to make it to an appointment, you're sane enough not to need it. Ezra Whedon, lest we forget, is the guy who got super suspicious of Joseph Kerwin. He was Mrs. Kerwin's first fiance, and he's the guy who kind of organized and led the raid on the farm. Hi, Jessie. Welcome. Hart is inclined to link this incident with the digging discovered last March, when a party in a motor truck were frightened away after making a deep excavation. But Sergeant Riley of the 2nd Station discounts this theory and points to vital differences in the 2 cases. In March, the digging had been in a spot where no grave was known, but this time a well-marked and cared-for grave had been rifled with every evidence of deliberate purpose, and with a conscious malignity expressed in the splintering of the slab, which had been intact up to the day before. Members of the Whedon family, notified of the happening, expressed their astonishment and regret, and were wholly unable to think of any enemy who would care to violate the grave of their ancestor. Hazard Whedon of 598 Angel Street recalls a family legend according to which Ezra Whedon was involved in some very peculiar circumstances, not dishonourable to himself, shortly before the Revolution, but of any Bond feud or mystery he is frankly ignorant. Inspector Cunningham has been assigned to the case and hopes to uncover some valuable clues in the near future. In the other article, Dogs Noisy in Pawtuxet. They've got great titles. Residents of Pawtuxet were aroused about 3 a.m. today by a phenomenal baying of dogs which seemed to centre near the river just north of Rhodes on the Pawtuxet. The volume and quality of the howling were unusually odd, according to most who heard it, and Fred Lemden, night watchman at Rhodes, declared it was mixed with something very like the shrieks of a man in mortal terror and agony. A sharp and very brief thunderstorm, which seemed to strike somewhere near the bank of the river, put an end to the disturbance. Strange and unpleasant odours, probably from the oil tanks along the bay, are popularly linked with this incident and may have had their share in exciting the dogs. It all seems very straightforward to me. I'm not really sure what people are worried about. The aspect of Charles now became very haggard and hunted, and all agreed in retrospect that he may have wished at this period to make some statement or confession from which sheer terror withheld him. The morbid listening of his mother in the night brought out the fact that he made frequent sallies abroad under cover of darkness, and most of the more academic alienists unite at present in charging him with the revolting cases of vampirism, which the press so sensationally reported about this time, but which have not yet been definitely traced to any known perpetrator. These cases, too recent and celebrated to need detailed mention, involved victims of every age and type and seemed to cluster around 2 distinct localities, the residential hill and the North End near the ward home, and the suburban districts across the Cranston line near Pawtuxet. Both late wayfarers and sleepers with open windows were attacked, and those who lived to tell the tale spoke unanimously of a lean, lithe, leaping monster with burning eyes, which fastened its teeth in the throat or upper arm and feasted ravenously. It's an exciting turn. Dr. Willett, who refuses to date the madness of Charles Ward as far back as even this, is cautious in attempting to explain these horrors. He declares, certain theories of his own, and limits his positive statements to a peculiar kind of negation. I will not, he says, state who or what I believe perpetrated these attacks and murders, but I will declare that Charles Ward was ignorant of them, innocent of them. I have reason to be sure he was ignorant of the taste of blood, as indeed his continued academic decline. God, learn to read words. I have reason to be sure he was ignorant of the taste of blood, as indeed his continued anemic decline and increasing pallor prove better than any verbal argument. Ward meddled with terrible things, but he has paid for it, and he was never a monster or a villain. As for now, I don't like to think. A change came, and I'm content to believe that the old Charles Ward died with it. His soul did, anyhow, for that mad flesh that vanished from Waite's hospital had another. Yeah, exactly. I mean, why just assume that this is connected to Charles? Yeah, it's just a whole different vampire. He just happens to be there. Like in Red Dead Redemption, how you go to that city and there's a vampire, and it's just like, well, guess there was a vampire there for a bit. Willett speaks with authority, for he was often at the ward home attending Mrs. Ward, whose nerves had begun to snap under the strain. Her nocturnal listening had bred some morbid hallucinations, which she confided to the doctor with hesitancy, and which he ridiculed in talking to her. Fuck you, Dr. Willett. Although they made him ponder deeply when alone. These delusions always concerned the faint sounds which she fancied she heard in the attic laboratory and bedroom, and emphasized the occurrence of muffled sighs and sobbings at the most impossible times. Early in July, Willett ordered Mrs. Ward to Atlantic City for an indefinite recuperative sojourn, and cautioned both Mr. Ward and the haggard and elusive Charles to write her only cheering letters. It is probably to this enforced and reluctant escape that she owes her life and continued sanity. Oh yeah, God forbid you tell the mother that her concerns may be founded. Nope, just send her to Atlantic City, which probably the best thing he could have done as a doctor at the time. Like, at least he didn't send her to an asylum. Part 2, Chapter 2, whatever. Not long after his mother's departure, Charles Ward began negotiating for the Pawtuxet bungalow. Oh yeah, just laughing at her like, oh, ha ha ha, you stupid woman. By the way, we got to get her out of the house for her safety. Send her only letters that will make her cheerful. Ha ha ha, idiot woman. You got your womb in your brain, you fool woman. You uterine beast. Not long after his mother's departure, Charles Ward began negotiating for the Pawtuxet bungalow. It was a squalid little wooden edifice with a concrete garage, perched high on the sparsely settled bank of the river, slightly above Rhodes. But for some odd reason, the youth would have nothing else. He gave the real estate agencies no peace till one of them secured it for him at an exorbitant price from a somewhat reluctant owner, and as soon as it was vacant, he took possession under cover of darkness, transporting in a great closed van the entire contents of his attic laboratory, including the books, both weird and modern, which he had borrowed from his study. He had this van loaded in the black small hours, and his father recalls only a drowsy realization of stifled oaths and stamping feet on the night the goods were taken away. After that, Charles moved back to his own old quarters on the third floor, and never haunted the attic again. Hey, Josh, what's up? We are happy, kind of. We are tentatively happy. We are not a people to whom it comes easy. Um, we're still trying to figure out when to date Charles Dexter Ward's madness from. But he's just bought a bungalow in Pawtuxet, which is really great for him. I can't wait to see the Medium article where they're like, this young man bought a bungalow at only the age of whatever. Yeah, because of the election results. Yeah, we're pretty happy about National getting stomped so hard. Pretty good. To the Pawtuxet bungalow, Charles transferred all the secrecy with which he had shrouded his attic realm, save that he now appeared to have two sharers of his mysteries. A villainous-looking Portuguese mixed-race person from the South Main Street waterfront who acted as a servant, and a thin, scholarly stranger with dark glasses and a stubbly full beard of dyed aspect, whose status was evidently that of a colleague. Neighbours vainly tried to engage these odd persons in conversation. The mixed-race person, Gomez, spoke very little English, and the bearded man, who gave his name as Dr. Allen, voluntarily followed his example. Ward himself tried to be more affable, but succeeded only in provoking curiosity with his rambling accounts of chemical research. Before long, queer tales began to circulate regarding the all-night burning of lights, and somewhat later, after this burning had suddenly ceased, there rose still queerer tales of disproportionate orders of meat from the butchers, and of the muffled shouting, declamation, rhythmic chanting, and screaming supposed to come from some very deep cellar below the place. Yeah, there are a few things to be equally worried about. Most distinctly, the new and strange household was bitterly disliked by the honest bourgeoisie of the vicinity, and it is not remarkable that dark hints were advanced concerning the hated establishment, connecting the hated establishment with the current epidemic of vampiristic attacks and murders, especially since the radius of that plague seemed now confined wholly to Pawtuxet and the adjacent streets of Edgewood. Ward spent most of his time at the bungalow, but slept occasionally at home and was still reckoned a dweller beneath his father's roof. Twice he was absent from the city on week-long trips, whose destinations have not yet been discovered. He grew steadily paler and more emaciated even than before, and lacked some of his former assurance when repeating to Dr. Willett his old story of vital research and future revelations. Willett often waylaid him at his father's house, for the elder Ward was deeply worried and perplexed, and wished his son to get as much sound oversight as could be managed in the case of so secretive and independent an adult. The doctor still insists that the youth was sane even as late as this, and adduces many a conversation to prove his point. Oh yeah, well, Lovecraft, not exactly a comrade. About September, the vampirism declined. How awful, though, to be targeted by a friggin' bourgeois vampire. How terrible. I mean, how boring. About September, the vampirism declined, but in the following January, Ward almost became involved in serious trouble. For some time, the nocturnal arrival and departure of motor trucks at the Pawtuxet bungalow had been commented upon, and at this juncture, an unforeseen hitch exposed the nature of at least one item of their contents. In a lonely spot near Hope Valley had occurred one of the frequent sordid waylayings of trucks by hijackers in quest of liquor shipments. This is during Prohibition. But this time the robbers had been destined to receive the greater shock. For the long cases they seized proved upon opening to contain some exceedingly gruesome things. So gruesome, in fact, that the matter could not be kept quiet amongst the denizens of the underworld. The thieves had hastily buried what they discovered, but when the state police got wind of the matter, a careful search was made. A recently arrested vagrant, under promise of immunity from prosecution on any additional charge, at last consented to guide a party of troopers to the spot, and there was found in that hasty cache a very hideous and shameful thing. It would not be well for the national, or even the international, sense of decorum if the public were ever to know what was uncovered by that awestruck party. There was no mistaking it, even by these far from studious officers, and telegrams to Washington ensued with feverish rapidity. The cases were addressed to Charles Ward at his Pawtuxet bungalow, and state and federal officials at once paid him a very forceful and serious call. They found him pallid and worried with his two odd companions, and received from him what seemed to be a valid explanation and evidence of innocence. He had needed certain anatomical specimens as part of a program of research whose depth and genuineness anyone who had known him in the last decade could prove, and had ordered the required kind and number from agencies which he had thought as reasonably legitimate as such things can be. Of the identity of the specimens he had known absolutely nothing, and was properly shocked when the inspectors hinted at the monstrous effect on public sentiment and national dignity which a knowledge of the matter would produce. In this statement he was firmly sustained by his bearded colleague Dr. Allen, whose oddly hollow voice carried even more conviction than his own nervous tones, so that in the end the officials took no action, but carefully set down the New York name and address which Ward gave them as a basis for a search which came to nothing. It is only fair to add that the specimens were quickly and quietly restored to their proper places, and that the general public will never know of their blasphemous disturbance. And I cannot remember what was in them, but I think the story will tell us, so let's go. On February the 9th, 1928, Dr. Willett received a letter from Charles Ward which he considers of extraordinary importance, and about which he has frequently quarrelled with Dr. Lyman. Lyman believes that this note contains positive proof of a well-developed case of dementia praecox, but Willett, on the other hand, regards it as the last perfectly sane utterance of the hapless youth. He calls especial attention to the normal character of the penmanship, which, though showing traces of shattered nerves, is nevertheless distinctly Ward's own. The text in full is as follows: 100 Prospect Street, Providence, Rhode Island, February the 8th, 1928. Sorry, just gotta move around a bit. My leg hurts. Dear Dr. Willett, I feel that at last the time has come for me to make the disclosures which I have so long promised you, and for which you have pressed me so often. The patience you have shown in waiting, and the confidence you have shown in my mind and integrity are things I shall never cease to appreciate. And now that I am ready to speak, I must own with humiliation that no triumph such as I dreamed of can ever be mine. Instead of triumph, I have found terror, and my talk with you will not be a boast of victory, but a plea for help and advice in saving both myself and the world from a horror beyond all human conception or calculation. You recall what those Fenner letters said of the old raiding party at Pawtuxet. That must all be done again, and quickly. Upon us depends more than can be put into words. All civilization, all natural law, perhaps even the fate of the solar system and the universe. I have brought to light a monstrous abnormality, but I did it for the sake of knowledge. Now, for the sake of all life and nature, you must help me thrust it back into the dark again. I have left that Pawtuxet place forever, and we must extirpate everything existing there, alive or dead. I shall not go there again, and you must not believe it if you ever hear that I am there. I will tell you why I say this when I see you. I have come home for good, and wish you would call on me at the very first moment that you can spare 5 or 6 hours continuously to hear what I have to say. It will take that long, and believe me when I tell you that you never had a more genuine professional duty than this. My life and reason are the very least things which hang in the balance. I dare not tell my father, for he could not grasp the whole thing, But I have told him of my danger, and he has 4 men from a detective agency watching the house. I don't know how much good they can do, for they have against them forces which even you could scarcely envisage or acknowledge. So come quickly if you wish to see me alive, and hear how you may help to save the cosmos from stark hell. Any time will do. I shall not be out of the house. Don't telephone ahead, for there is no telling who or what may try to intercept you. And let us pray to whatever gods there be that nothing may prevent this meeting. In utmost gravity and desperation, Charles Dexter Ward. P.S. Shoot Dr. Allen on sight and dissolve his body in acid. Don't burn it. Pretty normal letter. Oh yeah, the fate of the whole universe is at stake. By the way, if you see my pal, Dr. Allen, shoot to kill and dissolve his body in acid, please. So, I get the guy who thinks that this is where the madness, is in full swing. I can see his point of view. But, poor old Dr. Allen. This is such an annoying trope, though. It's the thing in movies where they're like, I know who the slasher is. Call me at this number. And they hang up, and then they come and that person is dead, obviously. It always happens. Just say it on the answering machine. It doesn't matter. Just say it. Then it's out there. Whatever. Dr. Willett received this note about 10:30 a.m. and immediately arranged to spare the whole late afternoon and evening for the momentous talk, and into the night as long as might be necessary. He planned to arrive about 4 o'clock, and through all the intervening hours was so engulfed in every sort of wild speculation that most of his tasks were very mechanically performed. Maniacal as the letter would have sounded to a stranger, Willett had seen too much of Charles Ward's oddities to dismiss it as sheer raving. That something very subtle, ancient, and horrible was hovering about, he felt quite sure, and the reference to Dr. Allen could almost be comprehended in view of what Pawtuxet gossip said of Ward's enigmatical colleague. Willett had never seen the man, but had heard much of his aspect and bearing, and could not but wonder what sort of eyes those much discussed dark glasses might conceal. Hang on, I'm just going to have a sip of... What have I got? Coke Zero. I'm researching proper freestanding backdrops for these. And if I had a green screen, I know what kind of backdrop I would have. It would be me and Ben Shapiro's beautiful love nest, the Sylvanian family's dream house, where we can live small, happy lives. Oh, it'd be great though, wouldn't it? The green screen, not the Sylvanian family's house. Promptly at 4, Dr. Willett presented himself at the Ward residence, but found to his annoyance that Charles had not adhered to his determination to remain indoors. The guards were there, but said that the young man seemed to have lost part of his timidity. He had that morning done much apparently frightened arguing and protesting over the telephone, one of the detectives said, replying to some unknown voice with phrases such as, I am very tired and must rest a while. I can't receive anyone for some time, you'll have to excuse me. Please postpone decisive action till we can arrange some sort of compromise. Or, I am very sorry, but I must take a complete vacation from everything. I'll talk with you later. Which is great. What a great away message. I am very sorry, but I must take a complete vacation from everything. I'll talk with you later. That's great. That's the best way to reply. Apart from a hedgehog and a saxophone emoji. That's the other best way. It's so great. It says everything. Then, apparently gaining boldness through meditation, he had slipped out so quietly that no one had seen him depart or knew that he had gone until he returned about 1 o'clock and entered the house without a word. He had gone upstairs, where a bit of his fear must have surged back, for he was heard to cry out in a highly terrified fashion upon entering his library, afterward trailing off into a kind of choking gasp. When, however, the butler had gone to inquire what the trouble was, he had appeared at the door with a great show of boldness, and had silently gestured the man away in a manner that terrified him unaccountably. Then he had evidently done some rearranging of his shelves, for a great clattering and thumping and creaking ensued, after which he had reappeared and left at once. Willett inquired whether or not any message had been left, but was told that there was none. The butler seemed queerly disturbed about something in Charles's appearance and manner, and asked solicitously if there was much hope for a cure of his disordered nerves. Wow, even the butler, a servant, is picking up on how weird Charles is becoming. And it's like he's got almost human intelligence. For almost 2 hours, Dr. Willett waited vainly in Charles Ward's library, watching the dusty shelves with their wide gaps where books had been removed, and smiling grimly at the panelled overmantel on the north wall, whence a year before the suave features of old Joseph Curwen had looked mildly down. After a time, the shadows began to gather, and the sunset cheer gave place to a vague growing terror which flew shadow-like before the night. Mr. Ward finally arrived, and showed much surprise and anger at his son's absence, after all the pains which had been taken to guard him. He had not known of Charles's appointment, and promised to notify Willett when the youth returned. In bidding the doctor good night, he expressed his utter perplexity at his son's condition, and urged his caller to do all he could to restore the boy to normal poise. Willett was glad to escape from that library, for something frightful and unholy seemed to haunt it, as if the vanished picture had left behind a legacy of evil. He had never liked that picture, and even now, strong-nerved though he was, there lurked a quality in its vacant panel which made him feel an urgent need to get out into the pure air as soon as possible. Oh, intriguing. Shall we do another chapter? I like how Lovecraft has been teasing us with this madness since the very beginning. He's like, so this stuff happened, but Dr. Willett says Charles was not yet mad. Also, all of this stuff happened, but Dr. Willett says this was still well within the bounds of sanity. And then some really fucked up stuff happened, but Dr. Willett's like, nah, he was fine. Yes, please. You're welcome, Danny. Absolutely. First vote. Always carries it. To the fastest typer. The spoils. Typist. Typesis. Part 3. The next morning, Willett received a message from the senior ward saying that Charles was still absent. Mr. Ward mentioned that Dr. Allen had telephoned to say that Charles would remain at Pawtuxet for some time and that he must not be disturbed. This was necessary because Allen himself was suddenly called away for an indefinite period, leaving the researchers in need of Charles's constant oversight. Charles sent his best wishes and regretted any bother his abrupt change of plans might have caused. In listening to this message, Mr. Ward heard Dr. Allen's voice for the first time, and it seemed to excite some vague and elusive memory which could not be actually placed, but which was disturbing to the point of fearfulness. Faced by these baffling and contradictory reports, Dr. Willett was frankly at a loss what to do. The frantic earnestness of Charles's note was not to be denied, yet what could one think of its writer's immediate violation of his own expressed policy? Young Ward had written that his delvings had become blasphemous and menacing, that they and his bearded colleague must be extirpated at any cost, and that he himself would never return to their final scene. Yet, according to latest advices, he had forgotten all this and was back in the thick of the mystery. Common sense bade one leave the youth alone with his freakishness, yet some deeper instinct would not permit the impression of that frenzied letter to subside. Willett read it over again, and could not make its essence sound as empty and insane as both its bombastic verbiage and its lack of fulfillment would seem to imply. Its terror was too profound and real, and in conjunction with what the doctor already knew, evoked too vivid hints of monstrosities from beyond time and space to permit of any cynical explanation. There were nameless horrors abroad, and no matter how little one might be able to get at them, one ought to stand prepared for any sort of action at any time. For over a week, Dr. Willett pondered on the dilemma which seemed thrust upon him, and became more and more inclined to pay Charles a call at the Pawtuxet bungalow. No friend of the youth had ever ventured to storm this forbidden retreat, and even his father knew of its interior only from such descriptions as he chose to give. But Willett felt that some direct conversation with his patient was necessary. Mr. Ward had been receiving brief and non-committal typed notes from his son, and said that Mrs. Ward in her Atlantic City retirement had had no better word. So at length the doctor resolved to act, and despite a curious sensation inspired by old legends of Joseph Curwen, and by more recent revelations and warnings from Charles Ward, set boldly out for the bungalow on the bluff above the river. Go, Dr. Willett. Willett had visited the spot before through sheer curiosity, though of course never entering the house or proclaiming his presence, hence knew exactly the route to take. Driving up Broad Street one early afternoon toward the end of February in his small motor, he thought oddly of the grim party which had taken that self-same road 157 years before, on a terrible errand which none might ever comprehend. Yeah, thinking about how few of those guys came back, well, I wouldn't want to go, but... The ride through the city's decaying fringe was short, and trim Edgewood and sleepy Pawtuxet presently spread out ahead. Willett turned to the right down Lockwood Street and drove his car as far along that rural road as he could, then alighted and walked north to where the bluff towered above the lovely bends of the river and the sweep of misty downlands beyond. Houses were still few here, and there was no mistaking the isolated bungalow with its concrete garage on a high point of land at his left. Stepping briskly up the neglected gravel walk, he rapped at the door with a firm hand, and spoke without a tremor to the evil Portuguese man who opened it to the width of a crack. This guy has done nothing so far. All he's done is exist and be a mulatto, quote. But he's evil. Yeah, definitely. He must, he said, see Charles Ward at once on vitally important business. No excuse would be accepted, and a repulse would mean only a full report of the matter to the elder Ward. The Portuguese man still hesitated, and pushed against the door when Willett attempted to open it, but the doctor merely raised his voice and renewed his demands. Then there came from the dark interior a husky whisper, which somehow chilled the hearer through and through, though he did not know why he feared it. Let him in, Tony, it said. We may as well talk now as ever. But disturbing as was the whisper, the greater fear was that which immediately followed. The floor creaked and the speaker hove in sight, and the owner of those strange and resonant tones was seen to be no other than Charles Dexter Ward. No, he's not evil, the Portuguese guy. Well, I mean, he might be, but we don't know that. All we know is he's Portuguese. Unbelievable. Decretio. The minuteness with which Dr. Willett recalled and recorded his conversation of that afternoon is due to the importance he assigns to this particular period. For at last he concedes a vital change in Charles Dexter Ward's mentality. and believes that the youth now spoke from a brain hopelessly alien to the brain whose growth he had watched for 6 and 20 years. Controversy with Dr. Lyman has compelled him to be very specific, and he definitely dates the madness of Charles Ward from the time the typewritten notes began to reach his parents. Those notes are not in Ward's normal style, not even in the style of that last frantic letter to Willett. Instead, they are strange and archaic, as if the snapping of the writer's mind had released a flood of tendencies and impressions picked up unconsciously through boyhood antiquarianism. There is an obvious effort to be modern, but the spirit and occasionally the language are those of the past. Oh, yeah, being Portuguese doesn't make him evil, but being in a Lovecraft book does. That's true, actually. That's true. Just want to take a second here to point out that in Twilight, Stephanie Meyer was like, "Oh, Edward sometimes talks and he uses really old-fashioned words and turns of phrase, but he never does." Just a note. Just something I noticed. And many other people have too. The past, too, was evident in Ward's every tone and gesture as he received the doctor in that shadowy bungalow. He bowed, motioned Willett to a seat, and began to speak abruptly in that strange whisper, which he sought to explain at the very outset. "I am grown phthisical," he began, "from this cursed river air." Oh, my voice went croaky right when it was meant to. "You must excuse my speech. I suppose you are come from my father to see what ails me, and I hope you will say nothing to alarm him." Phthisical means, that you've got tuberculosis, I think, or consumption. Thanks, I'm a good croaker. It was one of my talents in the horror maze. I could do the Ju-on croak, the Grudge. I could do the raspy breathing. I could do a lot of noises in the dark that really freak people out. I miss that. I mean, I can still do it outside, like the windows of the students who live near me, but it's not the same, and it's super illegal. Ward was studying these scraping tones with extreme care, but studying even more closely the face of the speaker. Yeah, evil Asmere. Something he felt was wrong, and he thought of what the family had told him about the fright of that Yorkshire butler one night. He wished it were not so dark, but did not request that any blind be opened. Instead, he merely asked Ward why he had so belied the frantic note of little more than a week before. "I was coming to that," the host replied. "You must know I am in a very bad state of nerves, and do and say queer things I cannot account for. As I have told you often, I am on the edge of great matters, and the bigness of them has a way of making me light-headed. Any man might well be frighted of what I have found, but I am not to be put off for long. I was a dunce to have that garden stick at home, for having gone this far, my place is here. I am not well spoke of by my prying neighbours, and perhaps I was led by weakness to believe myself what they say of me. There is no evil in any what I do, as long as I do it rightly. Have the goodness to wait 6 months, and I'll show you what will pay your patience well. You may as well know I have a way of learning old matters from things surer than books, and I'll leave you to judge the importance of what I can give to history, philosophy, and the arts by reason of the doors I have access to. My ancestor had all this when those witless peeping Toms came and murdered him. I have it now again, or am coming very imperfectly to have a part of it. This time nothing must happen, and least of all through any idiot fears of my own. Pray forget all I writ you, sir, and have no fear of this place or any in it. Dr. Allen is a man of fine parts, and I owe him an apology for anything ill I have said of him. I wish I had no need to spare him, but there were things he had to do elsewhere. His zeal is equal to mine in all these matters, and I suppose that when I feared the work, I feared him too as my greatest helper in it. Ugh, witless peeping toms are just the worst. Witty peeping toms are actually worse. Just making smug remarks. Ward paused, and the doctor hardly knew what to say or think. He felt almost foolish in the face of this calm repudiation of the letter, and yet there clung to him the fact that while the present discourse was strange and alien and indubitably mad, the note itself had been tragic in its naturalness and likeness to the Charles Ward he knew. Willett now tried to turn the talk on early matters, and recall to the youth some past events which would restore a familiar mood. But in this process he obtained only the most grotesque results. It was the same with all the alienists later on. Important sections of Charles Ward's store of mental images, mainly those touching modern times and his own personal life, had been unaccountably expunged, whilst all the massed antiquarianism of his youth held up from some profound subconsciousness to engulf the contemporary and the individual. The youth's intimate knowledge of elder things was abnormal and unholy, and he tried his best to hide it. When Willett would mention some favourite object of his boyhood archaistic studies, he often shed by pure accident such a light as no normal mortal could conceivably be expected to possess, and the doctor shuddered as the glib illusion glided by. It was not wholesome to know so much about the way the fat sheriff's wig fell off as he leaned over at the play in Mr. Douglas's Histrionic Academy in King Street on the 11th of February 1762, which fell on a Thursday, or about how the actors cut the text of Steele's Conscious Lovers so badly that one was almost glad the Baptist-ridden legislature closed the theatre a fortnight later. That Thomas Savin's Boston coach was damned uncomfortable, old letters may well have told. But what healthy antiquarian could recall how the creaking of Epinetus Olney's new signboard, the gaudy Crown he set up after he took to calling his tavern the Crown Coffee House, was exactly like the first few notes of the new jazz piece all the radios in Pawtuxet were playing? No normal mortal, huh? Odd. Ward, however, would not be quizzed long in this vein. Modern and personal topics he waved aside quite summarily, whilst regarding antique affairs he soon showed the plainest boredom. What he wished, clearly enough, was only to satisfy his visitor enough to make him depart without the intention of returning. Hey, we've all had dates like that, am I right? High five. To this end, he offered to show Willett the entire house, and at once proceeded to lead the doctor through every room from cellar to attic. Willett looked sharply, but noted that the visible books were far too few and trivial to ever have filled the wide gaps of Ward's shelves at home, and that the meagre so-called laboratory was at the flimsiest sort of a blind. Clearly there were a library and a laboratory elsewhere, but just where it was impossible to say. Essentially defeated in his quest for something he could not name, Willett returned to town before evening and told the senior ward everything which had occurred. They agreed that the youth must be definitely out of his mind, but decided that nothing drastic need be done just then. Above all, Mrs. Ward must be kept in as complete an ignorance as her son's own strange typed notes would permit. Mr. Ward now determined to call in person upon his son, making it wholly a surprise visit. Dr. Willett took him in his car one evening, guiding him to within sight of the bungalow and waiting patiently for his return. The session was a long one, and the father emerged in a very saddened and perplexed state. His reception had developed much like Willett's, save that Charles had been an excessively long time in appearing, after the visitor had forced his way into the hall and sent the Portuguese away with an imperative demand. And in the bearing of the altered son there was no trace of filial affection. The lights had been dim, yet even so the youth had complained that they dazzled him outrageously. He had not spoken out loud at all, averring that his throat was in very poor condition, but in his hoarse whisper there was a quality so vaguely disturbing that Mr. Ward could not banish it from his mind. I mean, come on, that's all of us when our parents do a surprise visit. We're just like, shit, pretend you're a normal human being. I know I've left something out that's gonna fuck me up. What did I leave out? And then you're like, oh no, my cigarette and dildo collection, it's all there. Or, whatever you don't want your parents seeing. Who would have a cigarette collection? Don Draper. Anyway, now definitely leagued together to do all they could towards the youth's mental salvation. Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett set about collecting every scrap of data which the case might afford. Pawtuxet gossip was the first item they studied, and this was relatively easy to glean since both had friends in that region. Dr. Willett obtained the most rumours because people talked more frankly to him than to a parent of the central figure, and from all he heard he could tell that young Ward's life had become indeed a strange one. Common tongues would not dissociate his household from the vampirism of the previous summer, while the nocturnal comings and goings of the motor trucks provided their share of dark speculation. Local tradesmen spoke of the queerness of the orders brought them by the evil-looking Portuguese servant, and in particular of the inordinate amounts of meat and fresh blood secured from the 2 butcher shops in the immediate neighbourhood. For a household of only 3, these quantities were quite absurd. Maybe they're doing the Jordan Peterson diet. That would make sense. He went mad on that one. Then there was the matter of the sounds beneath the earth. Reports of these things were harder to pin down, but all the vague hints tallied in certain basic essentials. Noises of a ritual nature positively existed, and at times when the bungalow was dark. They might, of course, have come from the known cellar, but rumour insisted that there were deeper and more spreading crypts. Recalling the ancient tales of Joseph Curwen's catacombs, and assuming for granted that the present bungalow had been selected because of its situation on the old Curwen site, as revealed in one or another of the documents found behind the picture, Dr. Willett and Mr. Ward gave this phase of the gossip much attention, and searched many times without success for the door in the river bank which old manuscripts mentioned. As to popular opinions of the bungalow's various inhabitants, it was soon plain that the braver Portuguese was loathed, the bearded and spectacled Dr. Allen feared, and the pallid young scholar disliked to a profound extent. During the last week or 2, Ward had obviously changed much, abandoning his attempts at affability and speaking only in hoarse but oddly repellent whispers on the few occasions that he ventured forth. Such were the shreds and fragments gathered here and there, and over these Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett held many long and serious conferences. They strove to exercise deduction, induction, and constructive imagination to their utmost extent, and to correlate every known fact of Charles's later life, including the frantic letter which the doctor now showed the father, with the meagre documentary evidence available concerning old Joseph Curwen. They would have given much for a glimpse of the papers Charles had found, for very clearly the key to the youth's madness lay in what he had learned of the ancient wizard and his doings. End of part 3. And then the next chapter is super long. It looks super long to me right now because my voice is sore. So yeah, we are more than halfway through easily. So if you will join me tomorrow, we'll continue, and Might even finish reading The Reminiscence of Dr. Samuel Johnson and his wonderful machine, whatever it was we were doing last time when the internet kept cutting out. So glad the internet didn't cut out this time. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I watched that, The Infectious Madness of Dr. Decker. I liked it. I didn't really understand the girl who was not that attractive, but she acted like she was super attractive, and that kind of made her really hot. I don't know. But then again, I'm not attracted to girls, so it was. Maybe she is super hot. I just don't get it. But yeah, thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Wash your hands. Don't raise the dead from their essential salts, I guess. Unless you have an adult you trust with you. See you tomorrow. Bye. Don't forget to like and subscribe.